reasons, which that I get. It annoys me, but I get it. But a lot of people here don't eat gluten because, like, someone in their yoga class told them not to. I keep asking people about this, and I started to wonder how many of these people even know what gluten is. So we decided to find out. Gluten, in case you didn't know, and I didn't know this, is a mixture of 2 proteins found in wheat and some other natural grains. But here in LA, it's comparable to Satanism. So we sent a camera crew out to a popular exercise spot right up the street from us to ask people who are gluten-free a simple question. What is gluten? What is this thing you will not eat? So we're going to meet a person who doesn't eat gluten, and together we're going to guess if they know what gluten is. Are you ready? Yeah! All right, what else do you have to do? All right, let's begin.
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
I do indeed.
And what is gluten?
Okay, does he know what gluten is? No. Well, everyone says no.
Well, as far as for me, how it affects my body,
But what is gluten?
This is pretty sad because I don't know.
We're 0 for 1. But I hate it, and I know. Next.
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
I do.
What is gluten?
All right, does this shirtless gentleman know it? Yes, okay.
Gluten's in bread. It's a flour derivative, wheat, things like that.
It's a flour derivative?
Right? It's like bread, things like that, pastries.
It's in those things?
Yeah, it's in those things.
But what is it exactly?
Gluten is it's like a grain, right?
Whether you eat it or not, you've likely heard of gluten. With the growing trend of gluten-free diets, it has a lot of people wondering, what the heck is it? More importantly, should you be eating it? Simply put, gluten is a combination of 2 proteins found primarily in wheat and related grains like barley and rye. That's it. It's just protein. These 2 proteins called gliadin and glutenin combine, creating gluten, which helps to nourish the plant's embryos and is a major component in giving the foods you eat that chewy goodness. It's kind of like glue. It makes dough stretchy and gives bread its sponge-like properties. So why is it so bad? Well, it's not. In fact, it's neither detrimental or essential for your health, and there's very little evidence to suggest that cutting it out is the healthier choice for the average person. On the other hand, those with the chronic digestive disorder called celiac disease aren't able to eat gluten at all, and this is where some confusion may have stemmed from. If consumed, a celiac's body sees gluten as an invader and triggers an immune response which ends up damaging the small intestine. Too much of this, and their body begins to suffer major nutritional deficiencies. More recently, scientists have recognized another small proportion of the population that aren't celiac but still have gluten sensitivity. That is, they suffer similar symptoms after eating gluten like cramps, diarrhea, and bloating. In both of these cases, gluten-free food options are essential. But if you don't suffer from either, there isn't much weight to the other health claims of gluten-free diets. It's in no way a toxin as some may suggest, and gluten-free doesn't necessarily mean that food is more natural, healthier, or lower in calories. Conversely, there are some risks of cutting gluten out. While the lack of gluten itself is of no concern, the vitamins and whole grains that it's often combined with are quite important. Without supplementing them, you could be hurting your own health. On top of it all, without gluten to bind your food together, more fat and sugar are often used to make gluten-free foods more enjoyable. At the same time, the popularity and fad of gluten-free diets has created a market for these foods. Where there once was little selection, now there are gluten-free options all over the place, and that's pretty cool for those who actually need it. But what if
Gluten-free diets are growing more and more popular among about 1/3 of Americans on a Consumer Reports survey say that they buy gluten-free foods or try to avoid gluten.
And 63% believe cutting out gluten has health benefits. As Michelle Lee reports, that may be true for some people, but for most, a diet without gluten can pose risks.
Store shelves are full of foods labeled gluten-free food, from oatmeal to pasta to chips. And in this deli, even the sandwich is gluten-free. About 7% of Americans cannot eat gluten because they have celiac disease or a diagnosed gluten sensitivity. But how good is a gluten-free diet for everyone else? To find out, Consumer Reports reviewed nutrition labels for more than 80 gluten-free foods.
People think that going gluten-free will help them lose weight or get better digestion and a whole host of other health benefits. But when we looked at those gluten-free products, we found that they're not necessarily healthier, and they may be less so.
One concern, some gluten-free foods contain more fat, sugar, or sodium than their regular counterparts. For example, the gluten-free bagel on the left has 7 grams of fat. The regular bagel on the right has 2 grams. And while products made of enriched wheat flour provide essential nutrients like iron and folic acid, you don't get those in many gluten-free foods. Another important worry, many of the gluten-free products Consumer Reports analyze contain rice flour or other rice-based ingredients.
In our tests of rice and rice products in 2012, we found that most contain arsenic, often at worrisome levels.
The bottom line, a small percent of people need to eat gluten-free foods. For everyone else, there's little evidence that a gluten-free diet is a healthier choice. We're on your side. Michelle Lee, WISC News 3.
And one more disadvantage to going gluten-free. Nearly all the gluten-free foods Consumer Reports purchased were more expensive than a regular counterpart. You can get more information about the downside of going gluten-free on our website.
Is the gluten-free diet a better diet for kids? Well, there are about 3 million people in the United States, kids and adults, who have celiac disease, and they really should avoid gluten. There are more people than that, not most people, who are gluten sensitive, and they should at least reduce gluten in their diets. But in general, gluten has been a healthy protein, a healthy part of the human diet as far back as we know. And a couple decades ago, if somebody were to switch to a gluten-free diet, it usually meant a pretty positive change because they were switching from eating a whole lot of flour products to a lot more produce and other real foods because there weren't gluten-free products available. But today what's happened is there's this proliferation of gluten-free processed foods where you're eating the same old flour products but just switching out some of the grains a little bit in there. It reminds me of the craze of fat-free cookies a couple decades ago. And you may not be getting any real benefit from that and maybe even doing worse than you would have otherwise because you might be substituting, for instance, more genetically modified grains than real ancient and whole grains. So I suggest eating as much as you can of healthy, real foods. Eat real fruits and real vegetables. Have grains in your diet, but choose ones that are whole grains and whole forms. I love oats, for instance. They're great for kids. Make oatmeal a part of their diet. And unless there's a real medical problem or a celiac disease or sensitivity, don't fall for gluten-free hype.